class, we want to talk about exit strategy. Now, when we say an exit strategy, what do we mean? Now, an exit strategy is considering in advance what will happen if the company suddenly ceases to exist. The exit strategy shouldn't just detail the steps or procedures, but it should also outline the overall approach, who is involved, what time, and how to implement it. When it comes to our critical and our high-risk vendors, we will need to have an exit strategy to make sure that the organization can remain in operation. Why? Because we mentioned that if our critical and high-risk vendors, if we are losing them, our company can also lose significant amounts of operation time. And so we need to be able to put all this in place. Now, we need to be able to test our exit strategy also, because it is a necessary step just for us to make sure and we are ensuring that our exit strategy that we have is working effectively. Now, why are exit strategies important? Exit strategies are important because no one wants to go into any type of agreement already planning its potential end. But when the business or when it comes to business engagement, it's simply a best practice. You are not just saying that, hey, I want to end the engagement. No. But you need to prepare that if something like this is happening, how do we go about it? And so it is your best insurance against any messy loose ends which will come up as a separation of the business engagement or the relationship. Often than not, it will slip through the cracks. And without one in place, you risk putting your organization in an untenable position. Why? Because if there is no exit strategy, you will realize that your company will just stand up and one day your third party will come to you and say that, hey, I don't want to do business with you anymore. And now it leaves you in a limbo. And so you need to make sure that it is there because you want your company to be running 24/7. Now, what are some of the things to consider to improve your vendor exit strategy? First, you are establishing an exit strategy, and it should be done early. An exit strategy for critical and high-risk vendors during vendor selection is something that needs to be done. You need to understand what the next best alternative can be or which organization can step in. And the best time to be able to vet all those potential replacements is during your stage where you are selecting your vendors. Why? Because the vendor that came in second place may be the best alternative down the road. So you need to make sure you are keeping the information on file, and you need to make sure that at any point in time, you are keeping up that relationship just in case that your main alternative or your main vendor decides to opt out. Now, you need to use a champion versus a challenger strategy. Now, they call it a champion versus a challenger strategy because every critical vendor or high-risk vendor, that organization that we use is either a champion or a challenger. A champion means that he is the one that is on top, or he's the one that is a vendor that you are using. The challenger is trying to overtake the champion. And so always you want to make sure that you have your champion and your challenger. Now you need to conduct a mini vendor selection process every time the vendor's contract is up for renewal. Besides being a sound business strategy, it puts the vendor on notice that performance is being evaluated. When everybody realizes that they are being evaluated, they put their base game on. And so you need to also make sure that you are keeping your vendors on their toes and they are doing what is needful. You also want to make sure, and the third strategy is that you need to evaluate your continuous service requirements. Now, an exit strategy should specify your organization's service requirements during the transitional end of a vendor relationship. Some of these requirements may include the vendor's obligation to continue providing specific levels of performance during the transition period. You need to be able to define the roles from your vendor during those transitions, which may differ from your normal business operations. You need to also provide parallel services for a predefined period during the transition of a new vendor. Then you need to have additional assurance surrounding the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your data during the transition to a new vendor. So it's important that you are evaluating that continuous service requirement just to make sure that at the end of every transactional year, the relations and the vendor's obligations, they are going about it as they are stipulated in the contracts. Now, you need to also be able to review the data security and privacy. Now, when you are maintaining data security and privacy, it is very critical, even during the transition from one vendor to the next. And there are a few data security and privacy precautions that you need to make sure that has been accounted for in your contracts. How do you securely transfer your organization or your customers' data, as well as the other critical assets that your vendor may have in their possession? If you don't talk about it, what do you do when it gets there? So you need to have that also in mind. Now, a mutually acceptable and documented method of data destruction. And what is assurance that when the vendor, or the assurance that the vendor has destroyed or removed all the sensitive information from their system? So you need to go for a certificate of destruction that shows that yes, they have, and has not shared the organization's sensitive information with any fourth party, intentionally or unintentionally. All these things need to be considered to improve your vendor exit strategy. And think about deconversion costs. Now, you need to consider that there's also is going to be financial impact of you terminating every vendor's contracts. And so, who is going to take up that cost? And it should be specified in the contract upfront. Because when people are coming for the contracts, the conversation is different than when they are leaving the table. Are there any fees for early termination of the contracts? Does the termination language include termination for cause? What are the specific costs of the deconversion from your current vendor? And will the new vendor charge for the conversion? And what is an estimate of that cost? Are there any additional fees, such as transitioning costs? Can you expect the return of any prepaid services for services not being delivered? And all this needs to, because you don't want to get there where it becomes things that you are now fighting over and going back and forth with the vendor on. I hope you enjoyed this session. We talked about the vendor exit strategy and how vendors are exiting, or how you need to improve, or the things you need to consider to improve your vendor exit strategy. Catch you in the next class.